Understanding the Basics of Pennsylvania Food Establishments and Cottage Food Regulations. My name is Audrey Thompson, and I'm a staff attorney here with the Penn State Center for Agricultural and Shale Law. This program, the Understanding Agricultural Law Educational Series, is a course designed to provide subject matter literacy and competence on fundamental issues of agricultural law to attorneys and business advisors who work with or represent agricultural or rural clients, but who may not necessarily specialize in agricultural law. The series is wholly sponsored by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture's Ag Business Development Center, established through the 2019 Pennsylvania Farm Bill. The Agricultural Business Development Center aims to enhance the long-term vitality of Pennsylvania farms by supporting farm transitions, both from generation to generation and from conventional to organic farming, supporting beginning farmers, providing risk management education, and providing financial assistance through low-interest loans and grants. As you can see, we've covered numerous topics so far, including ag labor, the Fair Labor Standards Act. We just did a program on H2A, ag cooperatives, finance, the farm credit system, crop insurance, conservation programs, Pennsylvania's Clean and Green program. We've got several webinars on that, understanding the basics of landowner immunity statutes, including agritourism. We've got lots of stuff, so we encourage you to check out our library there at agla.psu.edu/understanding agricultural law. Materials and recordings from everything is available on that website. Next slide. We've got some upcoming events under this Understanding Agricultural Law series banner. We've got Right to Repair in October, and then Animal Disease Control and Quarantines in November. And then in December, we're going to do Understanding the Basics of Children, Minors, and Farm Work. We're going to dig into some of the FLSA and state regulations, particularly pertaining to children and farm work there. Those are all on Fridays. They are at noon Eastern time, and registration is up and available for all of them on the events page on our website. We also have some other programs at the end of October. On Monday, October 28th, we're partnering with the Penn State Extension to present Navigating Employment Regulations on the Farm. This is going to be a producer-focused review of federal and state labor laws specifically pertaining to ag. So there is no CLE available for that if you're an attorney listening, but if you do have a farmer or producer clients, please pass that on. It's going to be a great overview of employment regulations on the farm. And then on Tuesday, October 29th, save the date for our Dairy Quarterly Legal Webinar. We'll have registration and more information up on that soon. Next slide. And finally, just a few reminders before I turn this webinar over. We are recording this. If you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A feature as opposed to the chat. But if you use the chat, we'll probably respond to that. I will collect those questions and ask them at the end. We encourage you to fill out the survey at the end of this webinar. Tell us what you liked, where we can improve, what topics you'd like to see in the future. And if you want us to submit this program for the free CLE credit for Pennsylvania CLE, or send you an attendance certificate that you can submit to your state CLE board, we have a link posted in the chat. I will post that a couple more times. You'll need to fill out this form to get your credits for CLE, and there's going to be a code word at probably near the end of this webinar this time. So you need to listen for that code word and put that in the form into the form on the farm. And I'm kind of looking here. I don't think I see anybody on the phone. But if you are on the phone and I don't see you, please send me an email if you need the CLE form. It's aet17@psu.edu. If you're on the phone, you don't have access to the chat, and so you can't get the CLE form any other way. So tell anybody who's on the phone that they need to send me an email. All right, I will now turn this webinar over. Chloe Marie is a research specialist at the Penn State Center for Agricultural and Shale Law, where she manages the center's issue trackers and virtual resource rooms, including compilations on cell-cultured food regulations, geographical indications, and the Food Safety Modernization Act. Chloe, the screen's all yours for Understanding the Basics of Pennsylvania Food Establishments and Cottage Food Regulations.
Thank you, Audrey, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. So cottage food laws allow individuals to produce and sell certain non-perishable food products out of their home kitchen. And Pennsylvania has had its own so-called cottage food laws for many years. Generally, food manufacturing businesses need licenses, while cottage food producers often do not. And in Pennsylvania, some limited types of food processing can take place in home kitchens without a license. but specific requirements must still be followed, especially in terms of tasting and labeling requirements and health and safety standards. To understand the types of food covered by these regulations, it is very important to distinguish between hazardous and non-hazardous foods. But first, we'll look at the rationale behind the cottage food laws and quickly go over which states have cottage food laws. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, many people, as myself, found comfort in cooking and baking at home. And there has been a growing trend during that time of states introducing and passing laws that make it easier for people to sell homemade food within the state lines. These laws often loosened or removed restrictions on selling homemade food products by either expanding the list of allowable food produced at home, raising or lifting gross sales caps for home-produced goods, or ensuring local governments allow home food production, and expanding sales and delivery venues for food produced at home. So the primary purpose of these laws is to provide more flexibility for small-scale food businesses to start and grow, and also strengthen local economies by reducing government oversight. So when it comes to business, states generally hold primary authority over interstate commerce as long as those activities do not directly affect interstate commerce. However, local and state governments frequently adopt the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's Model Food Code to keep their food safety regulations current and consistent with neighboring states, and to prevent the risk of foodborne illnesses. And these model rules, however, only carry the force of law when a state or local government officially codifies them into their regulations. So just going back to the other slide, the FDA defines a food establishment as any place where food is stored, prepared, packaged, served, and sold directly to consumers, but it specifically excludes private home kitchens. That said, there is an exception for non-hazardous foods sold at bake sales organized by religious or charitable groups, as long as people are clearly told that the food was made in a home kitchen. And we'll revisit the distinction between those types of foods shortly. But since 2021, like I said, many states have expanded the definition of food establishment to make it easier for people to sell home food without licenses. However, there are still rules about what kinds of food can be sold. So we won't have time to review every state's laws as we are focusing on Pennsylvania, but here's a quick survey of cottage food laws in the Mid-Atlantic region. So in Delaware, the state allows homemade bakery goods, jams, jellies, and other fruit preserves and candy products to be sold from what they call cottage food establishments. However, they do need to register with the Delaware Division of Public Health. Now, if you're a farmer processing non-hazardous food at home, you will need an on-farm home food processing license, and online sales are not allowed. And in Maryland also, if you're in Maryland, if your cottage food business makes less than $50,000 a year, you can sell non-hazardous foods directly to consumers without a license. In New Jersey, home-based food producers who want to operate a cottage food business must apply for cottage food operator permits, this time with the New Jersey Department of Health, and the gross annual sales of cottage food products are capped at $50,000. New York exempts home processors from licensing requirements. However, they do need to register as a home processor with the states. And Virginia also allows the sale of non-hazardous foods as well as honey up to 250 gallons a year without a permit. And the annual sale of pickles is also capped at $9,000. And finally, in West Virginia, you can produce and sell non-hazardous foods except for acidified foods without a permit. And if you're selling at a farmer's market, you will need to register with the local health department. And also, if you'd like additional details, I have included links on that slide to a recent survey of cottage foods laws published by the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic, and to our partners' webpage on cottage food laws. So now coming back to the types of food that can be manufactured, states generally prohibit the sale of TCS foods, short for time temperature control for safety foods, without the appropriate license. So what are hazardous foods? So the PDA food, the FDA food code classifies certain foods as certain foods as time temperature control for safety foods, meaning they are potentially hazardous and need to be carefully managed to prevent harmful bacteria and toxins from growing. And this helps avoid foodborne illnesses. So the key to keeping these foods safe is controlling both the temperature and the amount of time they spend in the so-called temperature danger zone, so between 41 degrees and 135 degrees. In this range, bacteria can multiply quickly, so it is important to minimize how long food stays there. And most TCS foods are perishable. Now, there are several factors that determine whether food requires time and temperature control. First, we have pH, which is a quantitative measure indicating the acidity level of a solution, or in our case, of a food. It tells us how acid or alkaline, meaning basic, a substance is. And the acidity level of the food plays a big role in bacterial growth. Solutions with a lower pH, with a pH below 4.6, which is the ideal measure, or more acidic than those with a higher pH. Then we have water activity, which refers to the amount of water available for bacteria to grow. The less water in the food, the less likely bacteria will grow. This is because the available water in these foods is so reduced, making it difficult for microorganisms to survive and reproduce. And the food safety value for water activity is 0.85 or below. So below 0.85, bacteria will not grow. Then we also have the interaction between pH and water activity. So when pH and water activity work together, they have a much greater impact on bacterial growth than either one alone. So that is why it is important to understand how they interact to prevent foodborne illnesses. And the FDA has put together helpful tables for this, and we'll take a look at them in just a moment. Then we have heat treatment. So if the food has been cooked, so it may have killed active bacterial cells, which reduces the risk of growing bacteria. And then we have packaging, basically how the food packaged post-cooking can prevent contamination. And packaging after heat treatment generally offers an extra layer of protection. However, food still needs to be cooled properly to prevent condensation, which could lead to contamination. Now, some common TCS foods include raw or cooked meat, poultry, seafood, and eggs, dairy products, but also cooked vegetables, grains, legumes, and fruits, raw sprouts, cut lemons, leafy greens, tomatoes, and garlic in all mixture. Essentially, any food that has a combination of pH and water activity levels that encourage bacterial growth falls into this TCS category. But the FDA also identified certain foods that do not require time and temperature controls. And this include hard-boiled eggs with intact shells, commercially processed and hermetically sealed foods, foods with safe pH or water activity levels, products that have gone through product assessments, and foods that do not support bacterial growth. So now the FDA provides us guidelines in a model food code for determining whether food needs time and temperature controls. So see on this slide, Table A. So Table A focuses on how the combination of pH and water activity impacts the safety of packaged foods. For example, foods with a pH less than 4.6 and water activity below 0.92 are considered safe without further controls. And now table B is similar to table A, but applies to foods that are either non-heat treated or not packaged after heat treatment. But before using these tables to determine if a food requires time and temperature controls, the FDA Food Code requires consideration of a few steps or questions which are presented in the decision tree shown on the slide. So step one, the central question here is, does the operator intend to maintain the food without applying time and temperature controls? If the answer is no, we simply need to store the food at safe temperatures, like I said, 41 degrees or below, or 135 or above. But if the answer is yes, we need to take a closer look and identify the correct table for determining whether time and temperature control for safety is necessary. Now moving on to step two, is the food heat treated? If the answer is no, then we're dealing with raw or partially cooked food. In this case, we move to step three. But if the answer is yes, most harmful bacteria are killed, but some may still remain active, and then we need to proceed to step four. Now step three asks, has the food been treated by another method that is not heat? If the answer is no, that means it is still raw or partially cooked, and we should move to step six. But if an alternative treatment method was used, we need to validate its effectiveness through inoculation studies and then go to step five. Now step four is all about packaging. Is the food packaged to prevent recontamination after heat treatment? If it is not packaged, the food could easily get contaminated again, and we should move to step six. But if it is packaged right after heat treatment, we have a safer product. In that case, we can tolerate a higher pH or water activity level and move to step seven. Step five asks, does further assessment or documentation show the food is safe without time and temperature controls? Here, the operator needs to provide data proving the food can be safely stored without time and temperature controls, often through inoculation studies. And if they can demonstrate this, we are on the right track. And whether the decision tree leads you to step 6 or 7, this is the point where you will use table A or B to evaluate food safety based on the food's pH and water activity levels. And finally, we arrive at step 8, evaluate whether the item is non-TCS or requires additional product assessment. Now, talking about product assessment. So after consulting table A or B, if a food is classified as requiring product assessment, indicated on the tables as PA required, it is considered TCS until additional testing confirms otherwise. Essentially, a PA required food is one where its acidity level, water activity, in addition to whether it was raw, heat treated, or packaged, do not clearly indicate the need for time and temperature control for safety. So in the absence of certainty, these foods are considered TCS until proven otherwise as a safety precaution. And if the additional testing results indicate that time and temperature controls are not necessary for food safety, a business might submit a variance request to the relevant regulatory authority to allow them to operate. And foods such as cut melons, sprouts, and tomatoes are commonly classified as TCS foods unless a product assessment indicates otherwise. So if you're handling TCS foods, the FDA Food Code requires that you obtain licensing from the relevant regulatory authority. However, if you're handling non-TCS foods, such as cottage foods, licensing is usually not required. So now that we have covered and understood the types of homemade foods that can legally be sold directly to consumers, let's take a closer look at the food establishments and cottage food regulations here in Pennsylvania. So first, let's have a quick look at the PA's food safety laws, which include the Retail Food Facility Safety Act and the Food Safety Act. So while the Retail Food Facility Safety Act specifically addresses retail food facilities and restaurants, the Food Safety Act focuses on the regulation of food establishments. Additionally, retail food facilities and restaurants and food establishments must comply with the Pennsylvania Food Code, which closely mirrors the FDA model food as adopted in the state's regulations. So the PA Food Code defines a retail food facility as any public place where food is stored, prepared, packaged, or sold for human consumption. And it includes restaurants, bars, clubs, grocery stores, convenience stores, schools, caterers, etc. However, this definition does not include dining cars run by Red Bull companies in interstate commerce or bed and breakfast homesteads or inns. You must obtain a valid license from the Department of Agriculture or the appropriate licensing authorities to run a retail food facility. But you may be exempt from this licensing requirement if your facility only sells prepackaged, non-potentially hazardous foods or beverage, it only sells raw agricultural products, or there is an official exemption order from the State Secretary of Ag or the local government unit. Now I'd like for you to keep in mind that even if your facility is exempt, it is still subject to inspections and other regulations under the Retail Food Facility Safety Act. Also be aware that local jurisdictions might have their own retail food facility licensing and enforcement rules, along with their own version of a food code or additional provisions that you will need to follow. And on these slides, I have included a link to a spreadsheet on the PDA's website that lists all county and local health departments you should check with when seeking licensing information. Now, a food establishment is any room, building, place, or vehicle used for the commercial storage, packaging, cooking, processing, or handling of food. However, this does not include retail food facilities, public eating or drinking places, or areas operating solely under milk or milk product permits. And under the PA Food Code, commercial food manufacturers, processors, distributors, and warehouse must register as a food establishment with the PDA. Commercial food establishments must follow good manufacturing practices as outlined in the Code of Federal Regulation and meet some water, sewage, and waste disposal information requirements. A food establishment registration does not mean you're automatically compliant with other states or other local rules such as water, sewer, zoning, or building codes. So it is up to you to make sure that you meet all state and local regulations. Now, as mentioned earlier, Pennsylvania allows individuals to prepare and sell food made in their personal kitchens. Only these foods must be non-hazardous. In many states, cottage foods are exempt from commercial or retail food service licensing and inspections. However, here in Pennsylvania, they are required to register with the PDA as limited food establishments. The applicants must submit a limited food establishment registration application and plan review to the PDA's Bureau of Food Safety and Laboratory Services and allow 4 to 6 weeks for processing of the application from the date of submission. And an on-site inspection may then proceed prior to registration and operation. There is a $35 fee, except for honey processors who produce and process honey on the same farm. But even if exempt from the fee, honey processors must still register and go through inspection as long as they sell their honey off farm. Also, Pennsylvania does not have any restrictions in the amount of money a limited food establishment may make annually, and direct sales are allowed as well as online sales. However, keep in mind that if you plan to sell your products at a retail satellite location, such as a farmer's market, roadside stand, or fair, or if you plan to open a retail store at your processing site, you might also be required to secure a retail food facility license. Also, when it comes to applying for a limited food establishment registration, applicants must obtain confirmation from their local government that limited food establishments can operate at the location. For example, all limited food establishments in Philadelphia County must operate in commercially zoned properties and use certified equipment when selling food. So the easiest way is to contact your municipality and speak with the zoning office. And if approval is granted, written confirmation must be included with your registration application. Also, another point, that the use of water is restricted to drinking water sources, specifically from a properly constructed on-site well or municipal water system. If the limited food establishment is using a public water supply, you will need to provide in your application the name of the supplier along with a copy of the most recent water bill. Now, for private water sources such as a well, a recent water test is required, and this test must be conducted by a DEP-approved lab and should include results for coliform bacteria and nitrates. When filling your application, you will also be asked to provide information about your sewage system to ensure it complies with the requirements of a food establishment. If you're connected to a municipal sewer system, you simply need to provide the name of the sewage authority. But for those with private sewer systems, it is required to contact your municipality's certified sewage enforcement officer to verify that your system is suitable. So now that we have discussed the registration application, let's focus on cottage foods themselves. So Pennsylvania allows the following foods to be made at home and sold directly to consumers. That being baked goods, including breads, cookies, brownies, biscuits, and most fruit pies and pastries, but also vinegars, dry goods, condiments, acidic, acidified, and fermented foods, jam, jellies, and similar products, candy, and beverage, drink, and juice. Again, anything that is not perishable, so non-hazardous. But Pennsylvania has some specific testing requirements for certain cottage food products. So the food code requires some testing for certain cottage foods before they are sold to consumers to ensure the safety and check that they are non-perishable. This is the case for jam, jellies, and similar products, beverage, drink, and juice, canned acid, acidified, and fermented foods, and candy with fruits. So let's start with jam and jellies. So jam and jelly producers do not need any testing if they follow what are called standard recipes from government-approved sources, just as the Blue Book, the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning, or University Extension Service websites. However, if you tweak a standard recipe or come up with a new one, the final product must be tested in a food testing lab. And this test is meant to check the sugar content to make sure it is 65% or higher, which is the standard for jams or jellies. And for fruit jellies, you must have a 45-55 ratio of fruit to sugar. For fruit preserves and jams, the berry group needs a 47-55 ratio, while the plum group needs a 45-55 ratio. Fruit butters and artificially sweetened jellies have their own specific standards for sugar content. However, conserves, marmalades, and spreads do not have set standards and do not require sugar testing. Now, juices and acidic and fermented beverages. So acidic or fermented beverages such as root beer, lemonade, lemon iced tea, or kombucha can be made in limited food establishments as long as their pH is below 4.6. Every beverage must be tasted to confirm this. Now, bottled or canned fermented drinks must be pasteurized at 180 degrees. However, freshly brewed coffee and tea are classified as TCS foods due to their higher pH and cannot be produced in limited food establishments. Now, when it comes to juice, only juices with a pH of 4.6 or lower can be made in limited food establishments, and sales are limited to the production site or any satellite locations. Limited food establishments are allowed to produce 3 categories of canned foods: naturally acidic, acidified, and fermented foods. So naturally acidic foods, these are foods that naturally have a pH of 4.6 or below, like most fruits. So if you're canning something like apples or peaches, you are in this group. Next up are acidified foods, which are low acid foods that have been made acidic by adding ingredients like vinegar or lemon juice. So salsa, chow chow, pickled vegetables, and hot sauce fall into this category. Lastly, there are fermented foods, and these foods go through fermentation, which is a process that lowers the pH. So think of things like kimchi, sauerkraut, and pickles. They start out less acidic, but thanks to fermentation, they become acidic enough for safe canning. If you're producing and selling these foods directly to consumers, there are a few steps you need to follow. You will need a written recipe and a process flow diagram approved by a food inspector. Plus, every unique recipe has to be tested in a lab to ensure the product reaches a balanced pH of 4.6 or below, although a pH of 4.2 or below is recommended for safety. Now, testing the pH should be done 24 hours after the product has cooled down. Homogeneous food can be tasted directly, but for thicker or mixed foods, you might need to blend or puree the sample first. And to make sure everything is safe and stable, you will need to apply a thermal process. And there are two main methods known, the hot fill hold process, which involves heating your product to at least 180 degrees, filling it into containers, then inverting the containers to pasteurize the headspace for a minute. So it works best for smooth foods like sauces or salsa. And then we have the water bath or steam canning. So here the product is preheated, sealed in containers, and then boiled or steamed until the coldest spot reaches at least 180 degrees for 25 seconds. There is also an alternative process for certain oil-based recipes, which skips the heat, but requires the pH to be 3.3 or below, and specific acids like acetic or benzoic acid. And this product must sit at 77 degrees or higher for 48 hours before it is ready to go. Now, most candies do not need pH testing except for chocolate-covered fruits. However, pH testing may be necessary if the fruit's acidity is uncertain. So homemade packaged foods obviously must come with proper labels and contain at least the following information: the product name, a list of ingredients in descending order by weight, any applicable allergen information, the name and address of the manufacturer or distributor, the net weight or quantity displayed in the lower third of the main panel with a font size of at least 8 points. However, there is an exception for bakery items made and sold directly to consumers within the Commonwealth, whether at the bakery itself or at a satellite location like a farmer's market. They do not require labels directly on the product, but if a customer asks, you must be able to provide ingredient information on the spot. On the other hand, if the bakery items are made outside the limited food establishment, then full labeling is required. Additionally, any health claims on your product labels must be accurate and backed by evidence. And if you choose to include health claims, your labels must comply with the FDA's nutritional labeling requirements. And if you like more detailed information on the labeling of products, I encourage you to check out our prior ABDC webinar that covers the basics of food labeling. Now, health and food safety standards. So starting with pets. Pets are strictly prohibited from entering the kitchen or any area where food is prepared or stored. However, if your home is set up so the food processing area, meaning the kitchen, is completely separated from areas where pets are allowed, for example, by a physical barrier like a door, and if the kitchen area has its own entrance and exit to prevent any contact with pets, you might be eligible for limited food establishment registration. Pets include but are not limited to dogs, cats, birds, and small animals like rabbits or ferrets, but this does not apply to fish, cage reptiles, hamsters, or other similarly confined animals. as long as their cages are not located in or near the kitchen area. Children are not allowed in the kitchen while food is being prepared for this business purpose. In terms of the age, while there are no specific age restrictions for employees or operators in a limited food establishment, all workers are required to have a basic understanding of food safety and hygiene practices. Now, in terms of storage, all cooking ingredients must be stored separately from personal items, such as on separate shelves or in separate cupboards, and should be clearly labeled, stored appropriately, and protected. Homemade food producers are required to use food-grade containers that prevent pests and help maintain the proper temperature to prevent spoilage. So that kind of wraps up our webinar on the basics of Pennsylvania food establishment and cottage food regulations.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone so much, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Bye all.